Welcome back guys to KENAN TV. In this video, I want to do another episode of my What If series. And in this video, I want to talk about what if Conor McGregor goes in there and beats Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov in a rematch. How could he do it and what would happen afterwards? With that being said, let's jump right into the video. The road to a potential Khabib Nurmagomedov vs Conor McGregor rematch seems to be very foggy at the moment. Conor McGregor said that he wanted to fight Cowboy Donald Cerrone, who has been looking pretty revived lately after those two impressive victories over Mike Perry and Hernandez. And then at the same time we have Max Holloway, who moved up in divisions, fighting Dustin Poirier for the interim 155-pound belt. And outside of this all, we have Tony Ferguson, who is probably the most deserving contender for the title. So I don't really know how all of this is going to be playing out, but assuming that Conor McGregor goes in there and he beats Cerrone and he beats Tony Ferguson, and Khabib going in there and defeating the winner between Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway, only then can there be a rematch. But assuming that everything plays out the way it does, let's take a closer look at what Conor McGregor could be able to do in order to get a victory over Khabib. To begin with, we have to really analyze how Conor McGregor looked in the first fight. What was he able to do successfully and what led him to his demise in that fight? Personally, I would have to say that the ring rust was very much so apparent there, and I felt like the long layoff kind of got to Conor McGregor's head, because after he left and fought Floyd Mayweather in boxing, he was a fighter that was the featherweight champion who dominated Jose Aldo and dominated the current featherweight champion Max Holloway. Not only that, he goes in there and he also fights for the 155-pound title, and he dominates that champion also. So that was the Conor McGregor that left the sport on top of the game, untouched, unfazed, looks exceptional. Then a year and a half, 2 years later, he comes back, and from there I would have to say that I believe that he was still in the mode where he believed that he was still at the top of the game and in the fight shape that he was back then. Because by the time he fought Eddie Alvarez, he already had quick turnaround fights with Jose Aldo, Nate Diaz 1, Nate Diaz 2, and then he went in there and he fought Eddie Alvarez. So clearly his mind was as sharp as it could have ever been. So for him to leave and then come back after a break, that sharpness was not there in my opinion. Because from the opening of the fight, Conor McGregor was a bit over-aggressive in my opinion. He came forward and he immediately backed up Khabib, which was in my opinion the right strategy to approach the fight in. But because Khabib Nurmagomedov was not really taking any of Conor McGregor's baits and not really walking into any of Conor McGregor's traps, we quickly found that Conor McGregor was throwing too many big shots too early. He was really giving up positions that really were fatal, because as soon as he went for the high kick, Khabib moved out of the way and shot him for a takedown, and then something questionable also happened. Instead of posting up and backing up away from the takedown, Conor met it with a knee, and from there it was just all Khabib time. Took him down and kept him on the floor, which really zapped a lot of Conor McGregor's energy, and that is really the problem. Because Conor McGregor is very good when he is still as fresh as he could be and as light as he can be, because the more the fight goes on, the heavier his legs get, the heavier his breaths get, the less likely his knockout punch will find a way into the fight. And that is really what happened in the fight against Khabib. Now what he was able to do well was keep Khabib close to the octagon. In the third round, that was probably the round that he won. He used a lot of teep kicks, he used a lot of good jabs that kept him questioning and never really had Khabib able to know his way into the fight. He shot him for a couple of takedowns that Conor McGregor stuffed, which was all good. So in the rematch, if Conor McGregor is going to win that fight, we have to assume that that is going to be the two things that he has to re-employ into the fight. Because logically speaking, Khabib Nurmagomedov was probably the best that he could be. Coming back and fighting Barboza, dominating him, having those 3 rounds with him, going in there and fighting Al Quinta, dominating him for 5 rounds, and then going in there and fighting Conor McGregor, we really have to believe at that point Khabib was probably the best that he could have ever been and the sharpest he could have ever been. So for me, logically speaking, I would have to say that Conor McGregor is the fighter that can improve the most in a rematch. An improvement is really what he needs in my opinion. Not necessarily improving on his striking, not necessarily improving on his grappling either. I would have to say the best improvement that he can make is in terms of approaching the fight, because logically speaking, Conor McGregor is not going to get any better than he is at the moment. Khabib Nurmagomedov is not going to get any better than he is at the moment. Maybe little small adjustments in their game, but overall I believe they will be pretty similar to the fighter they both were in the first fight. For Conor McGregor to go into this fight, I would have to say that he has to employ another aggressive game plan where he comes forward and he backs up Khabib. But instead of opening up too early, I would have to say for Conor McGregor to be able to get Khabib a lot more frustrated, he has to be a lot more patient. Throw less strikes, that is going to make Khabib Nurmagomedov a lot more anxious, because the less you strike with an opponent that has his back against the cage, the more you will start to make him anxious, and the more nervous he will get, and the more mistakes that opponent will make. That is exactly what Conor McGregor needs, because in the first fight, Khabib employed a game plan that didn't take any baits that Conor McGregor put forth. And I believe that the mistakes that Conor McGregor made in an Nate Diaz 1 fight, where he was a bit too over-aggressive, too anxious, too active, I believe those were the same mistakes that he made in the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight. So going into a Khabib Nurmagomedov rematch, I would have to say that he has to employ a Nate Diaz 2 type game plan, where he is still dominating the distance and still coming forward, but taking his time more. And I would have to believe that that will probably be the way to victory for him in the rematch. But let's just say that Conor McGregor beats Khabib Nurmagomedov for the UFC title. What would happen next? Now obviously by that point we have to realize that Conor McGregor is probably the guy that has accomplished the most in the UFC. The first ever champ, unified the interim belt with the undisputed featherweight belt, goes in there, unifies the undisputed featherweight belt with the lightweight belt, goes to boxing, fights Floyd Mayweather, comes back, loses to Khabib Nurmagomedov, beats him in a rematch if that happens to be the case, reclaims his lightweight title, and then at that point we have to really realize, what can that man still do? By that point we have to understand that Conor McGregor's motivation will probably not be there, because the only fight that could make sense by that point would have been the Max Holloway fight. Now in this scenario we have to see that Max Holloway has to go in there and fight Khabib first. In this scenario, Max Holloway loses to Khabib, because in order for Conor McGregor to beat Khabib again, he has to fight Khabib for the title. So let's say Max Holloway goes in there and loses to Khabib. He will lose his featherweight belt and he will lose his interim title, which will make a rematch for Conor McGregor not that interesting. Because if Max Holloway still had the 145-pound belt and moved up to fight Conor, that would have been a huge fight. If Max Holloway defeated Dustin Poirier, that would leave him with no featherweight belt, and like I said, in this scenario, Khabib Nurmagomedov is going to beat the winner for the interim title, assuming that will be Max Holloway. So let's just say Max Holloway loses to Dustin Poirier, goes back to featherweight, and dominates. Khabib Nurmagomedov goes in there and beats Dustin, and then a Conor McGregor fight can happen, because Conor by that point would have probably defeated Tony Ferguson and Donald Cerrone. So maybe a fight with champion Max Holloway could be in the works, but I would have to say that that possibility is a pretty unlikely scenario. I would have to say that one fight that we can always depend on to be there is a Nate Diaz trilogy fight, and that fight would probably be a nice way to close off his career. Fighting Nate Diaz for a third time and calling it quits would probably be a fairy tale ending to his career. Ultimately, these are only speculations and assumptions of what the future could be like, but for now, only time will tell. This has been What If Conor McGregor beats Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov in a rematch. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave what you guys think of the video in the comment section down below. How do you guys see Conor McGregor beating Khabib, and what could be next after that? Now as always, I have been Kenan from KENAN KTV, signing off. Later. I couldn't give a fuck about me.